The day Ellen Hayes realized her own daughter would rather let her walk to the cardiologist alone than risk being 10 minutes late for work was the day something inside her quietly broke. She didn't scream or argue. She just stared at the phone in her hand, feeling her heartbeat stumble in her chest, and understood that the person she had loved and protected for 35 years no longer saw her as someone worth slowing down for. It was a cold Tuesday in Dayton, Ohio, the sky hanging low and gray over the little brick houses on Maple Street. The garbage truck had already rattled by, leaving damp tracks on the pavement. Inside her one-story home, Ellen moved from bedroom to kitchen in slow, careful steps, pressing her palm against the dull ache that had crept into her chest before the sun was even up. Every breath felt just a little too shallow, a little too hard-won. The faint hum of a neighbor's television slipped through the wall, everyday noise that made her own fear feel strangely invisible, like something happening underwater where no one else could quite hear it. The week before, her doctor had spoken in a tone that made her fingers curl around the edge of the exam table. "Abnormal EKG," he'd said gently. "We need more tests as soon as possible, Mrs. Hayes. Please don't put this off." He'd circled Tuesday morning on a paper appointment card and looked her straight in the eye. "I want you here, all right?" Megan had been on speakerphone, promising brightly, "Don't worry, I'll drive her. She's not going alone." Megan lived 15 minutes away, in a modern apartment complex with clean lines and a lobby that smelled like fresh paint and coffee. 35. Sharp blazer, quick heels on concrete, always talking about clients and campaigns Ellen didn't fully understand. When Ellen mentioned her at church, her voice dipped automatically into pride. "She's a marketing manager downtown," she'd say. "They really depend on her." It sounded better than admitting how often their plans got canceled at the last minute. That morning, Ellen woke an hour early because sleep refused to hold her. She ironed her good blouse, the pale blue one with tiny flowers that Frank used to love on her, until the steam hissed out and the fabric lay flat. She buttoned it slowly, fingers careful on each button. She chose dark slacks, sensible shoes, and dabbed a little powder over the shadows under her eyes. Putting herself together felt like the only part of the morning she still controlled. She caught her reflection in the hallway mirror on her way to the kitchen. Soft gray hair, lined face, eyes a little too bright, and forced a small smile, as if she could steady herself from the outside in. By 8 o'clock her purse was waiting by the door, neatly zipped. Inside were her insurance card, a folded list of medications, and the paper with the doctor's address written in large, steady letters. The car keys lay beside it on the narrow entry table, their metal edges catching the gray light. Megan had said she'd arrive at 8:15. Ellen checked the microwave clock, then her phone, then the window. The driveway stared back at her, empty and wet. At 8:12 she peeked through the curtains again. Nothing, just the neighbor's flag stirring, a jogger puffing past in a hooded sweatshirt, the world minding its own business. Ellen's phone sat in her palm, screen unlocked, volume up. "Traffic," she whispered to herself. "She's probably just stuck in traffic." The words tasted like denial in her mouth. She sat on the floral couch, springs creaking beneath her, and felt the ache in her chest spread like a slow bruise. On the coffee table in front of her, a cluster of picture frames leaned against one another. Megan with pigtails and a missing tooth, Megan in a soccer uniform, socks too big for her skinny legs, Megan in a cap and gown, laughing wide while Ellen stood beside her, eyes damp but shining. Ellen picked up the graduation photo and traced her daughter's smile with her thumb. Have you ever looked at someone you'd die for and felt them slipping away? If this moment touches you, tell me in the comments, who would you trust with your heart? For a second she wondered when exactly the girl in those photos had turned into the busy woman on the other end of a phone line, and how she had missed the moment that change became distance instead of growth. At 8:29 her phone finally rang. The sharp sound made her jump. "Megan?" she answered quickly, already half rising, eyes darting toward the window. She imagined headlights in the driveway, her daughter walking up the path with that rushed smile she wore when she was trying to do everything at once. Instead she heard office noise drifting through the line, muffled voices, footsteps on tile, the distant ding of an elevator. Megan's voice came tight and hurried. "Mom, I'm so sorry, but I can't take you this morning." The words landed like ice water down her spine. Ellen's hand found the edge of the entry table, fingers curling for balance. "Oh," she said softly. "Did something happen? Are you all right?" The ache in her chest sharpened, joined by a heavy, sinking feeling that had nothing to do with arteries or blood flow. She had spent years telling herself Megan was simply busy, that cancelled plans meant pressure, not distance. Now she wasn't so sure. "There's a last-minute client meeting," Megan rushed on. "Everyone's freaking out about the quarterly numbers. If I miss this, it's going to look really bad. I tried to reschedule with the doctor, but they're booked solid. The earliest they can see you again is in 6 weeks." Somewhere behind her a printer whirred to life. The sound felt cruelly normal against the hollow in Ellen's chest. "You know how it is," Megan added, like they were on the same side of this choice. Ellen remembered the years she'd whispered that same phrase to Megan. "You know how it is." Every time money was tight or plans had to change, always wrapping sacrifice in something that sounded reasonable so her daughter wouldn't feel guilty. 6 weeks is a long time," Ellen murmured. Her fingers pressed slowly over the sore spot beneath her collarbone, as if she could calm the pain by smoothing it away. "The doctor said this appointment was important. He sounded worried. The last word came out thinner than she meant it to. She hated how small she sounded, how much like a burden asking for too much. For a second, neither of them spoke, and all Ellen could hear was the hum of Megan's office breathing in her ear. "Then just go by yourself, Mom," Megan said at last, words clipped and practical. "You can drive. It's just across town. You've had a license for, 50 years? You'll be fine. Please don't make this harder. I really can't risk my job right now." Her voice trembled slightly on the last sentence, but what Ellen heard most clearly was one quiet message underneath. "You're on your own." If you've ever watched someone choose their schedule over your safety, tell me honestly, would you still make excuses for them, or would you finally admit how much it hurt? If you were Ellen in that moment, would you forgive, or would something inside you begin to close? Ellen stared at the keys on the table, their familiar jangle suddenly sounding foreign in her mind. Once, they had meant late-night drives for Megan's medicine, early morning school drop-offs, surprise trips for ice cream. Now they looked like a test she hadn't studied for. She could have reminded Megan of the emergency rooms, the double shifts, the years of always saying yes. Instead, she swallowed. "All right," she said quietly. "I don't want you to get in trouble at work. I'll drive myself." "Thank you," Megan breathed, relief rushing through her words. "Text me when you get there, okay? I've really got to run. Love you." The call ended with a tiny click that echoed too loudly in the little house. Ellen stood in the sudden quiet, phone still in her hand, the kitchen clock ticking hard in the background. She slipped the phone into her purse, took the keys, and told herself she wouldn't cry over a ride to the doctor. Cold air rushed against her face as she stepped onto the small porch. She locked the door out of habit and walked toward the silver sedan waiting in the driveway. The same car she'd once used to drive Megan to school and sleepovers now felt strangely unfamiliar. Her chest tightened as she lowered herself into the driver's seat, buckled the belt, and gripped the steering wheel. "It's just across town," she whispered. "You can do this." The engine started on the second turn of the key. Ellen backed out slowly, checked her mirrors twice, then eased onto Maple Street. Houses and bare trees slipped past her windows as she focused on the simple rhythm of driving. Signal, brake, turn, breathe. The doctor's office was 20 minutes away. At the next major intersection, the light ahead turned green and she rolled forward, eyes fixed on her lane. She never saw the pickup truck barreling toward the red light on her left, its driver looking down at his buzzing phone instead of the road. The impact came with a force Ellen had never imagined, a violent shudder that lifted the front of her car and slammed it sideways in a burst of screeching metal and exploding glass. For a moment, she didn't understand what had happened. Her world became a spinning blur. Gray sky, asphalt, the flash of a truck grill, before everything snapped still. Then came the silence. A terrible, ringing silence that pressed against her eardrums and made her breath catch like a trapped bird. Her hands were still gripping the steering wheel, knuckles white. She blinked, dazed, tasting metal in her mouth. A streak of warmth slid down her forehead, tracing a thin path toward her eyebrow. She brought a trembling hand to her face, and her fingers came away red. Her chest pulsed with a new, deeper pain. Sharp, heavy, and wrong. For a long second she just sat there, staring at her own reflection in the cracked rearview mirror, unable to move. Have you ever felt time slow down so much it felt like your heart had to fight just to keep up? Someone shouted in the distance. A door slammed. Feet ran. A young man appeared at her window, eyes wide. "Ma'am, stay still, okay? Don't move. I'm calling 911. His voice shook as he took in the crushed side of her car, the bent metal like a crumpled drink can. Ellen tried to speak. "I'm fine." But the sound barely crawled out of her throat. She wasn't fine. She knew it. Her body knew it. And yet, the first thought that drifted hazily through her mind was absurdly gentle. Megan's probably in her meeting right now. As sirens wailed closer, memories rushed in, uninvited, sharp as broken glass. Little flashes of motherhood she hadn't thought about in years. She remembered the night she worked a closing shift at the diner and still woke before dawn to braid Megan's hair for picture day. She remembered sitting on a cold metal bench at every soccer game, rain soaking her shoes because Megan had begged her, "Don't leave, Mom, not until the end." Hanoi, she remembered the nights teenage Megan slammed doors, shouted words meant to hurt, and Ellen still slid a plate under her door afterward because anger didn't erase hunger. 2 paramedics tugged the car door open with practiced force. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" one asked, shining a small light into her eyes. She nodded weakly. The movement sent pain shooting down her side. They placed a collar around her neck, spoke to each other in quick, clipped phrases. BP, possible fracture, transport priority. Hands eased her onto a stretcher as the cold air hit her like a splash of icy water. "You're going to be okay," one said, his voice calm, steady. She hoped he was right. But inside her, something darker whispered that the doctor's warning had not been exaggeration. As the ambulance doors closed, Ellen let her eyes drift to the window, where the world smeared past in flashing shapes. She fought the urge to reach for her purse. Her phone was inside. She wanted to text Megan, not to blame her, not to guilt her, just to let her know where she was. "I made it to the doctor," she thought weakly. "Just not the way I expected." But her hands felt heavy, her mind slipping in and out of focus. The paramedic noticed her fading alertness. "Stay with us, okay? What's your name?" "Ellen," she breathed. "That's good, Ellen. Can you tell me what day it is?" She opened her mouth, but instead of answering, another memory surfaced, the one that always made her chest tighten in a different way. Megan at 13, sitting on the edge of her bed, tears streaming down her cheeks after a fight with friends. Ellen kneeling beside her, brushing her hair back. "You are loved," she had whispered. "Even when you feel alone, you are loved." She wished she could hold that version of Megan now, remind her of the same truth. Remind herself. The ambulance turned sharply, and Ellen inhaled sharply as pain radiated through her ribs. The paramedic grabbed her hand. "Deep breaths. You're doing great." But her own breath sounded foreign to her ears, a thin, wheezing thing. She felt the world narrowing at the edges, dimming, as if someone was slowly lowering the lights. She forced herself to focus on the ceiling of the ambulance, on the fluorescent glow flickering above her. In the ER, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as nurses swarmed around her. Machines beeped, belts tightened around her arm, monitors flashed numbers she couldn't make sense of. Voices rose and fell around her. Low oxygen, possible cardiac involvement, page cardiology. She tried to follow the words, but they slid away like rain down a window. When a nurse leaned close and said gently, "Is there someone we should call?" Ellen felt tears prick her eyes. Someone. The words stung in a way she couldn't explain. She wanted to say Megan's name. She wanted to believe Megan would drop everything, would run into this room breathless and worried, would reach for her hand the way Ellen had reached for hers hundreds of times. But then she remembered the call that morning, the impatience in her daughter's voice, the strain. The words that replayed now like a bruise pressed too hard. Then just go by yourself. Her lips parted. My daughter, she whispered. But then her voice faltered. She didn't give a name. She didn't finish the sentence. The nurse touched her arm softly and moved away to continue her work. Hours passed in a blur of tests, CT scans, blood draws, whispered medical terms. Ellen drifted in and out, consciousness fraying at the edges. Every time she surfaced, she expected her phone to buzz, expected Megan to notice the missed text, the silence, the wrongness in her mother's absence. But Megan didn't call. Not once. In one brief moment of clarity, Ellen imagined Megan sitting at her desk, her attention pinned to the glowing screen in front of her, completely unaware that her mother was lying in a hospital gown under harsh lights. She imagined the world continuing as if Ellen's life weren't hanging by a thread. The thought ached more deeply than the injuries themselves. A doctor finally stepped into the room, his expression grave but measured. "Mrs. Hayes," he said gently, "we found some things we need to talk about. There are complications we need to address immediately." But Ellen barely heard the rest. Her focus was drifting, her vision tunneling, her breath thinning. "If you've ever felt forgotten by the person you raised," the narrator's voice would whisper if this were a story told aloud, "what would you have wanted them to understand before it was too late?" The doctor's voice faded. The room tilted. The beeping of the heart monitor quickened. And then, just as her vision began to blur into darkness, a sound cut through the room, sharp, sudden, and shattering. The phone on the wall rang, and the nurse answering it paled at the voice on the other end. The nurse held the phone tightly against her ear, her expression sharpening as the voice on the other end spilled out in frantic, breathless bursts. "Slow down," she said gently. "I need you to repeat that. Who are you trying to reach?" Her eyes flicked toward Ellen, who lay motionless on the bed beneath a thin hospital blanket, her breaths shallow and uneven. The nurse's grip on the receiver tightened. In the dim, humming room, Ellen drifted somewhere between waking and a warm, heavy fog she couldn't push through. She heard sounds, soft footsteps, the rustle of paper, the beep of a monitor, but everything felt oddly distant, as though she were listening from underwater. Only one word reached her clearly from the nurse's half-whispered voice: "Daughter." That word cut through the haze like a cold blade. The nurse approached the bed, her face etched with sympathy. "Mrs. Hayes," she said quietly, "your daughter is on her way." Ellen blinked slowly, her eyelids heavy. She wanted to believe it. She truly did. But something in her chest tightened, an echo of disappointment so fierce it almost made her dizzy. Megan hadn't called all day. Now she was coming. But why now? Was it guilt? Obligation? Fear of what other people might say? As the nurse adjusted a line connected to Ellen's arm, a doctor entered the room. He carried the weight of bad news in the set of his shoulders. "Her condition is unstable," he said quietly to the staff, though Ellen caught fragments of it through the fog. "Internal bleeding. Possible cardiac event triggered by the trauma. She needs to be monitored closely." Ellen's heart thudded weakly. Internal bleeding. Cardiac event. The phrases floated in and out like drifting clouds. She tried to hold on to them, to understand what they meant, but her mind kept slipping away, pulled by a tide she couldn't fight. She felt the edges of the world darkening again. Just then she heard a memory. Bright, stubborn, young. Megan at 9 years old, holding a crumpled permission slip in her tiny hands, tears gathering at the corners of her eyes. "Mom, they're going without me," she'd sobbed. "You forgot to sign it. They're leaving right now." Without hesitation, Ellen had grabbed her keys, rushed her into the car, and sped across town to catch the school bus just in time. "I'll always get you where you need to be," she had said, brushing Megan's hair behind her ear. "I promise." That promise echoed through her now, bitter-sweet and hollow, because when she needed Megan to drive her somewhere life or death, Megan had chosen a meeting instead. If you've ever carried someone through storms only to be left in your own, tell me honestly, does love still feel the same after that? Meanwhile, across town, Megan was speeding down I-75 with shaking hands. her breath shallow. She kept checking the digital clock on her dashboard as if time itself might give her answers. She hadn't meant for any of this to happen. She just wanted to do well at work, to prove herself, to not fall behind, not again, not after the last performance review where her boss told her she needed to prioritize efficiency. But when the hospital called, when a trembling voice said, "Your mother has been in an accident, please come right away," her carefully built world cracked wide open. Panic clawed at her throat. She hadn't even known her mother had left the house yet. She hadn't called. She hadn't checked in. Not once. "Please, God," she whispered as she switched lanes. "Please let her be okay." A horn blared behind her as she veered slightly, and she straightened the wheel quickly. Tears blurred her vision. She wiped them hard with the back of her hand. "Not now," she muttered. "Please, just not now." Because deep down, underneath the panic, something uglier lived, a guilt she had buried for years. She could still hear the last word she'd spoken to her mother that morning. "Then just go by yourself." Sharp, dismissive, said while her eyes were glued to quarterly reports, not the fear in her mother's voice. Megan swallowed hard. Why had she said it like that? Why had she made her mother feel so alone? Back at the hospital, Ellen's breathing grew slower, more irregular. A nurse hovered close, adjusting her oxygen mask. "Stay with us, Ellen," she whispered. "Your daughter's coming." But Ellen's mind was wandering again, slipping under the surface. She found herself remembering something she hadn't thought about in decades. A winter night when she'd carried Megan outside to look at falling snow. The little girl had shivered in her arms, giggling, reaching up to catch the flakes. "They melt fast," Ellen had warned, "so hold them gently." Now the memory felt like a metaphor she didn't want to understand. Something precious slipping away, melting before she could hold on to it. A sudden flurry of footsteps echoed in the hallway. Voices. Then a new presence filled the doorway. A man in his late 40s wearing a worn navy jacket and carrying an envelope in one hand. His expression was tight, unreadable. He looked at Ellen, then at the machines, then at the nurse. "I'm here for her," he said. His voice was low, steady, too controlled. "I'm the one who called earlier." The nurse frowned. "You're her family?" The man hesitated, and in that tiny pause, the air in the room shifted, just enough for anyone paying attention to feel it. "No," he said, "but she needs to hear something before it's too late." His words sliced through the room like a cold wind. Ellen stirred weakly on the bed, her consciousness fighting to rise. Who was he? How did he know her? What could he possibly need to say now, at this moment when every second felt borrowed? The man stepped closer, the envelope trembling slightly in his hand. "She didn't tell her daughter," he murmured. "But she told me everything." The nurse froze. The room seemed to hold its breath, and then the door behind him swung open, hard. Megan stood there, pale, breathless, eyes wide with horror as she saw her mother on the hospital bed. She didn't notice the man at first, not until he turned, not until their eyes met. Her face twisted with sudden recognition. "Oh no," Megan whispered. "Not him." Megan froze in the doorway, her breath catching in her throat as the man slowly turned toward her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The hum of the monitors filled the heavy silence between them. His face, older, lined, eyes darker than she remembered, pulled her straight into a past she had spent years trying to bury. Her stomach dropped. "What are you doing here?" she whispered, voice barely holding together. The man held the envelope tighter, knuckles whitening. "I warned you this day might come," he said quietly, "and now it has." His gaze shifted toward Ellen, softening with something like regret. "She trusted me with something you should have known long ago." Megan's heart hammered violently in her chest. "You need to leave." Her voice came out sharper than she intended. The nurse glanced between them, sensing an undercurrent she didn't understand. "I'm her daughter. I'll handle whatever this is." But the man didn't move. "You've been walking around with the wrong story for years," he said, his voice rising just a notch. "And she never corrected you because she loved you too much to ruin your picture of her." He held up the envelope. But this is the truth she couldn't protect you from forever. Megan's breath stuttered. Her mother's truth? Protected her? What was he talking about? She looked at Ellen, whose eyes fluttered weakly behind her oxygen mask, her chest rising in fragile, shallow motions. Megan stepped closer to the bed, tears swelling. "Mom, I'm here now. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." She brushed trembling fingers over Ellen's hand, terrified she was already too late. But the man took a step forward. "She can still hear you," he said softly. "But you need to hear this too." He gently placed the envelope on the small table beside the bed. She wrote everything down the night she realized she might not make it through the year. Megan jerked around to face him fully. "The year!" Her voice cracked. "She's been sick for months, not years." His eyes softened with something that looked disturbingly like pity. "That's what you think, because she told you what she thought you could handle. She hid the rest." Megan felt the ground tilt beneath her. She stared at her mother's frail figure, pale skin, trembling breaths, IV lines snaking across her arm. Hidden illness? Hidden truths? How much had she missed? How much had she chosen to ignore? "If you've ever been too busy to notice someone suffering right in front of you," the narrator would whisper, "tell me honestly, would you forgive yourself once the truth finally came out?" Megan's knees weakened. She gripped the railing of the bed for support. "Why would she hide something like that from me?" The man let out a slow breath. "Because she didn't want to be your burden." The words hit harder than any physical blow. "And because she didn't want you to look at her with the same resentment she once lived through." Megan shook her head, disbelief ripping through her. "Resentment? What resentment? My mom never—" But before she could finish, the curtain dividing the room slid open and a doctor stepped inside, his expression tight. "We need family outside for a moment," he said, voice urgent. "She's destabilizing." Megan's heart dropped. She turned back to Ellen, who was now struggling for each breath, her chest rising in panicked, shallow motions. "No, please, just give me a second. Mom, look at me." Alarms began to beep faster. Nurses rushed forward. The doctor repeated firmly, "Ma'am, please step out. We need space." Megan backed away, shaking, tears streaking her face. The man followed her into the hallway. She turned on him, voice trembling with anger and fear. "Just tell me who you are. Tell me why you're here now, after all these years." He looked at her with a mixture of apology and something heavier, something worn and sorrowful. "My name is Daniel Cross," he said at last, "and your mother saved my life once, in ways you never knew." Megan stared, stunned. The name hit her like a forgotten chord. Daniel Cross. Her mother had mentioned that name exactly once, years ago, in a tone Megan had been too young to understand. A tone made of sorrow and something unspoken. Daniel swallowed. "Your mother and we shared a part of her past you never saw. She went through something that changed her forever, something she thought would destroy you if you knew." He gestured toward the envelope inside the room. "It's all in there." Megan's voice broke. "What does any of that have to do with me? Or with today?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "Everything. Because the reason she hides her pain, the reason she refuses to ask for help, even when she's terrified, is tied to what happened back then. And what happened back then started with her own mother." Megan blinked. "Her mother?" Daniel nodded slowly. "The woman who raised her taught her one thing: don't be a burden. Ever. Not even when you're breaking." A deep ache formed in Megan's throat. She looked back at the window of the hospital room, where she could see nurses working frantically around her mother. The truth hit her like ice. Ellen wasn't avoiding help because she trusted Megan. She was avoiding help because she feared Megan might treat her the way she had once been treated. Tears slipped down Megan's cheeks. She pressed her hand to her forehead. "I didn't know. I didn't know." Daniel stepped closer, lowering his voice. "And that's why she wrote the letter. Because she was afraid her time was running out, and because you needed to understand before she was gone." Megan gasped. "Gone?" But before Daniel could respond, the door to the room swung open. A nurse stepped out, her face pale, eyes filled with urgency. "You need to come in," she said. Both of you. Megan's pulse pounded. Is she? The nurse swallowed hard. She's asking for you. Megan's breath hitched so sharply it hurt. Daniel nodded once, solemnly, and they both stepped toward the doorway, just as a sudden piercing alarm blasted from the monitors inside. The alarm shrieked through the room, cutting through every thought, every breath, every shred of hope Megan had been clinging to. Nurses rushed toward the bed in a blur of blue scrubs, voices rising sharply as they checked Ellen's vitals. The heart monitor flickered with erratic spikes, each one more chaotic than the last. Megan stumbled to her mother's side, her pulse hammering so hard she felt it in her throat. "Mom! Mom, I'm here! Please look at me!" Her voice cracked under the weight of fear. Ellen's eyes fluttered open, faint and unfocused, scanning the room until they finally landed on her daughter. A faint smile ghosted across her lips, the kind a mother gives a frightened child, even when she's the one in danger. "Megan," she whispered, barely a breath. Megan leaned closer, tears slipping freely down her cheeks. "Mom, please stay with me. I need you. I'm so sorry. I should have taken you. I should have been here. I should have—" She choked on her own words, grief tightening around her throat. Before she could continue, a doctor appeared at Ellen's other side, speaking firmly to the staff. "She's going into cardiac distress. Prep for pressors. Increase her oxygen." More machines beeped urgently. A nurse slipped a syringe into Ellen's IV line. Another adjusted the monitor leads with trembling speed. Amid the chaos, Ellen lifted a weak hand, brushing the air until it found Megan's fingers. She squeezed barely, but enough. "Don't cry," she murmured. I didn't want to worry you." Megan broke. A sob tore from her chest. "You're my mother. I should worry. I should always worry." She squeezed back, as if her grip alone could tether Ellen to the world. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Ellen's tired eyes softened. "You were busy," she whispered. "I didn't want to be too much. Too much." Those words hit Megan like a blow. Every missed call, every postponed visit, every rushed conversation, they all came back to her like shards. She felt suddenly, painfully aware of how her mother must have interpreted every small dismissal. If you've ever realized too late how much someone hid their hurt to protect you, tell me honestly, would you ever see yourself the same way again? Daniel approached slowly, standing at the foot of the bed. He said nothing, but the heaviness in his eyes spoke volumes. His presence was a silent reminder that Ellen had carried burdens Megan never saw, burdens shaped by a past Megan knew nothing about. The heart monitor emitted another erratic beep that spiraled into a long, terrifying. Nurses exchanged grim looks. "Doctor, we're losing the rhythm," one murmured. The doctor leaned in. "Mrs. Hayes, can you hear me?" He spoke loudly, clearly. "Stay with us. You're not done here." Ellen blinked slowly as if fighting sleep. Her breath hitched. Her grip on Megan's hand weakened. Megan shook her head in panic. "No! No, Mom! Please! Please, stay awake! I'm here! I'm right here!" She leaned down until her forehead touched Ellen's, their breaths mingling. "I'm not going anywhere. I promise." At that moment, Ellen's gaze shifted past Megan's shoulder, softening into something that looked like recognition. Old, familiar, tender. Megan turned her head, expecting a nurse or the doctor, but no one was standing there. It was as if Ellen was seeing someone only she could see, someone from a memory, someone she had loved once, maybe long before Megan was born. Her lips moved. A faint whisper escaped. "Mom!" Megan froze. Her heart squeezed painfully. Her grandmother, the one Ellen never spoke about, the one whose face Megan only knew from a single faded photograph, the one Ellen described as strict, busy, never home, the one Ellen spent her entire life trying not to become. Ellen's eyes glistened. "I'm sorry," she whispered to someone who wasn't there. "I forgive you." For a moment, the room felt suspended in time. The monitors continued their frantic chorus, but the air held stillness, like the quiet after a storm. Megan felt a chill ripple down her spine, understanding something she had never understood before. Her mother's silence wasn't indifference. It was inherited survival, learned self-shrinking, generational pain passed down quietly, silently, invisibly, until today. A nurse stepped closer. "Doctor, her BP is dropping fast. She's not responding to the meds." The doctor nodded grimly. "Prepare to shock." Megan's heart seized. "No, no, wait, please." She looked at Ellen, whose chest rose unevenly, each breath more fragile than the last. "Mom, please don't leave me with questions. Please don't leave me without hearing your truth." Daniel took a step forward. "She wanted you to know," he said softly. "It's why she wrote the letter. She couldn't say it out loud, but she needed you to understand." He looked at the envelope on the table, untouched, sealed. "Everything is in there." The monitor shrieked again, one long, flat sound that made every stomach in the room drop. Ellen's body jerked faintly as the rhythm vanished into a terrifying straight line. Nurses stepped back. The doctor grabbed the defibrillator paddles. "Charging!" Megan sobbed, clutching her mother's hand. "Please, she just said she forgives. She can't go now." The doctor pressed the paddles to Ellen's chest. "Clear!" Her body lifted slightly. The monitor flickered. For a heartbeat, Megan prayed, begged, bargained. The line dipped, shifted, trembled, then steadied into a faint, slow rhythm. Relief punched the air from Megan's lungs. She let out a shaking cry. Ellen's eyes flickered open for a fraction of a second, just long enough to look at Megan with a soft, tired apology. The doctor leaned close. "She's not out of danger," he warned. Not even close. But Megan was already gripping her mother's hand like an anchor. "I'm here," she whispered fiercely. "I'm staying." A nurse approached the doctor with a chart, her expression tight. "Sir, we just got the latest scan." She hesitated. "You'll want to read this." The doctor glanced at the papers, and his face fell. "You both need to hear this," he said. "Now." He turned the chart toward Megan and Daniel. But before he could speak, Ellen's heart monitor began to rise in sudden, alarming spikes. The heart monitor spiked so suddenly, the entire room jolted into motion again. Nurses hurried to Ellen's side, adjusting wires, checking her pulse, preparing emergency meds. Megan felt her own heartbeat slam against her ribs, her breath catching as she clutched her mother's hand tighter. "Mom, please, stay with me," she whispered, voice trembling. But Ellen's eyelids barely fluttered. Her breaths came in quick, shallow gasps, like someone running out of air at the bottom of a long dive. The doctor raised a hand to steady the room. "She's conscious, but her heart is under extreme stress. We need to get this back under control." His tone was gentle but urgent, threaded with the realism of someone who had already seen too many endings in a room like this. He turned back to the chart, the scan the nurse had delivered moments earlier. Megan's stomach twisted. She could feel the truth hovering like a storm cloud ready to break. Daniel stepped closer too, his jaw tight, sensing something was very wrong. The doctor took a breath. "Mrs. Hayes has more internal damage than we initially thought." He tapped the paper lightly. "There's a tear in one of her coronary arteries. It's small, but it's critical. It likely predated the accident, meaning it was already weakened before today." Megan's throat tightened. "Before today? But she never said— She swallowed hard, panic rising again. "You're saying she came into that car ride already at risk?" The doctor nodded. "Yes, and it means the crash wasn't the only trigger. Her heart was already fighting." He paused, letting the weight of it settle. "She's been hiding symptoms for a long time." Megan felt the breath leave her body in one painful rush. Her mother's words echoed inside her. "I didn't want to be too much." The meaning hit her like a punch. Ellen hadn't asked for help because she was already terrified of being a burden, because generations of self-silencing had taught her to endure pain in silence rather than risk disappointing someone she loved. If you've ever watched someone you love pretend they're fine just to keep peace, the narrator might say, "Tell me honestly, did you see the truth, or only what you hoped was true?" Megan wiped her eyes with shaking hands. "So what happens now? What can you do? There has to be something. Surgery, medication, something. The doctor hesitated. There is one option. A high-risk surgical repair. But, he looked at Ellen, then at Megan. Her body may not survive it, and we need her consent while she's conscious. Megan gasped softly. Then we have to ask her now. Daniel stepped forward, his voice gentle. Wait. Let the doctor finish. The doctor glanced at him briefly, then continued. The surgery could save her life, or it could end it on the table. It's a gamble. A very dangerous one. The tension in the room became almost physical, pressing against the walls. Megan felt dizzy, torn between fear and the fragile thread of hope the doctor had offered. Mom? She whispered, leaning down until her forehead nearly touched Ellen's. Can you hear me? There's a procedure they can do. It might help, but they need your permission. Ellen's eyes fluttered open, thin, tired, shimmering with both pain and clarity. She looked between Megan, the doctor, and Daniel. She understood, and with that understanding came something else. A soft, resigned warmth, as if she had already made peace with her decision long before this moment. Sweetheart, she whispered, her voice thin as paper. I'm so tired. No, Megan cried. Don't say that. Mom, please. Please don't give up. Ellen lifted a trembling hand, touching Megan's cheek with the gentlest brush of her fingers. I'm not giving up, she said softly. I don't want more pain. Her voice cracked. I don't want you watching me suffer because I stayed too long. Megan broke into sobs. I'm not watching you suffer. I'm watching you fight. And I'm here. I'm here now. Just let them try. Ellen's eyes softened with love so deep it felt like a warm blanket wrapped around Megan's breaking heart. But then she turned her head slightly, toward Daniel. Is it time? She whispered. Daniel's face crumpled. He nodded slowly. Only if you're sure. Megan whipped around. Time? Time for what? What is she talking about? Daniel looked at her with a sadness that reached bone deep. The truth in the letter. Megan's gaze darted to the envelope sitting inches from her mother's pillow. Untouched. Unread. Heavy with the weight of everything Ellen never said. Mom? Megan begged. Tell me. Please. Tell me yourself. Ellen met her daughter's eyes, tears forming. I want you to read it, she whispered. I want you to know me. All of me. Her breath faltered again, and alarms began to chirp in warning. Nurses stepped closer. The doctor hovered, watching her vitals drop. Megan grabbed her mother's hand. Mom, just stay with me. Please, stay until I read it. I'll read it right now. But Ellen shook her head. Not now. Not here. Her voice was fading. When you're ready. Her eyelids fluttered. Her chest rose weakly. The monitor beeped faster. Daniel stepped closer to Megan and placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. There's one more thing she hasn't told you, he said, voice low and urgent. Megan turned to him, tears streaming. What? He hesitated, swallowed, then whispered, She didn't want you to drive her today. She didn't ask because she trusted you. She didn't ask because she planned to tell you everything after the appointment, everything about her past, everything about me. Megan's entire body went still. About you? Daniel nodded once. Because I'm not just someone she helped. He looked toward Ellen, anguish flickering in his eyes. I'm the reason she learned to hide her pain. Before Megan could speak, before she could ask what that meant, Ellen's heart monitor let out a piercing alarm that sent every nurse sprinting. Her pulse crashed. Her breaths clipped into silence. And Megan, frozen in place, realized she might be seconds away from learning the truth too late. The sound that ripped through the room was different this time, sharper, more urgent, the kind of alarm that made every muscle in a person's body lock in fear. Nurses rushed forward instantly, their movements a blur of trained precision. The doctor barked orders, his voice cutting through the chaos as Ellen's heart rate plunged into a terrifying freefall. Megan's knees nearly buckled. Mom! Mom! She reached for her, but a nurse gently pulled her back. Please let us work, the nurse urged, though her own voice trembled. Ellen's chest barely rose. Her lips had lost color. Her eyes fluttered half open, staring at nothing like she was looking past the room, past her body, past everything that tied her to the world. Megan pressed a hand over her mouth, her sob muffled and raw. This can't be happening. Not now. Not before I know. Not before she tells me. Daniel stood frozen at the foot of the bed, his face stricken with a pain so deep it looked like it lived in him for years. His fists were clenched, his jaw rigid, but his eyes were full of the kind of grief only someone who had loved Ellen in a different life could wear. Her rhythm's unstable. Shock again, the doctor ordered. The paddles pressed to Ellen's chest. A jolt. Her body lifted, and the monitor leapt, dipped, then stuttered into a weak, wavering rhythm. A thin thread of life. Nothing more. The doctor exhaled. She's back, but barely. Megan swallowed a sob and rushed back to her mother's side. Mom, please come back to me. She touched her hand, now cold and limp. Please don't leave me with questions. Please don't leave me like this. Ellen's eyelids flickered. A faint sound escaped her, almost too quiet to catch. Meg, I'm here, Megan whispered desperately. I'm here, Mom. But Ellen's eyes drifted toward Daniel. A knowing, quiet look passed between them, something bittersweet, something old, something shared. Megan saw it, and for the first time she understood. Her mother's past wasn't just painful, it was intertwined with this man. Tell her, Ellen breathed, voice barely dust. She deserves the truth. Then her eyes slipped shut again, her breath shallower than before. Megan turned to Daniel, tears burning down her face. Who are you to her? What happened between you two? Daniel stepped closer. Agony etched into every line of his face. I didn't want to do this here, he said quietly. Not like this. But you need to understand what she carried. Megan gripped the edge of the bed, bracing herself. Daniel inhaled slowly. I'm the boy your grandmother refused to let into the house. Megan blinked in confusion. My grandmother? What? She told Ellen that I wasn't good enough for her, he continued, voice thick. Said I'd ruin her future. Said she needed to focus on school, not on me. He swallowed hard. But Ellen, she was in love with me. We were 17. Kids. And I didn't know. His voice cracked. I didn't know she was pregnant. The world snapped still. Megan's breath caught violently. Pregnant? Daniel nodded, grief twisting his features. Your grandmother forced her to hide the pregnancy, gave the baby up before anyone knew, told Ellen it was for the best, told her to forget, told her to move on. Megan staggered back as if he had struck her. No, that's not. My grandmother wasn't. She couldn't have. She did. Daniel's voice was quiet but unwavering. Ellen was 16 when she gave birth. I never even knew. Not until your mother found me years later. Broken, addicted, living in shelters. Megan stared at him, breath trembling. Why would she look for you? Because she wanted to apologize, Daniel whispered. For leaving, for hurting me, for losing our child. He wiped a hand over his eyes. But she didn't owe me anything. She was a victim, Megan. She was a kid forced into silence by a woman who didn't believe in weakness. Megan's chest heaved. She felt like the air around her had turned into ice. Her mother, pregnant at 16, a child taken, forced adoption, and all of it hidden, all of it buried, all of it carried inside her mother's quiet, gentle heart for decades. If you've ever discovered a truth about someone that shattered everything you thought you knew, the narrator might whisper, tell me, did you feel anger or sorrow? Megan pressed a trembling hand to her forehead. Why didn't she tell me? Why didn't she say anything? Daniel looked at her with quiet, devastating truth. Because she was terrified you'd look at her the way her own mother once did. Megan's breath broke. Tears flooded her eyes. She didn't want to be a burden, Daniel said. Not even with her pain. Not even with her past. Not even with her dying. Megan collapsed into the chair beside the bed, sobbing into her hands. Everything made sense now. Her mother's self-silencing, her quiet apologies, her fear of taking up space. It wasn't weakness, it was trauma. Inherited, repeated, unspoken. Daniel stepped forward, kneeling beside her. There's more, he whispered. The baby, I found him. Megan's head snapped up. What? You found? Daniel nodded slowly. He's alive. Grown And he's been looking for her. Megan's breath stilled. Does she know? She found out 3 months ago, Daniel said. It's why she wrote the letter. She planned to tell you both, but she was scared. She wanted the right moment. A nurse rushed toward the bed suddenly. Doctor, her pressure's dropping again. The doctor hurried to Ellen's side. She's crashing. Megan grabbed her mother's hand. Mom, please don't go, please. You can't leave before I meet him. Before we fix this. Before we heal. Alarms shrieked. The room spun into chaos. Ellen's breaths thinned to nearly nothing. Daniel looked at Ellen with a breaking expression. Ellen, he whispered, stay. Don't do this, please. And as the doctor reached for the defibrillator again, Ellen's eyelids fluttered weakly, and she whispered something so faint it barely existed. He's here. Megan froze. Daniel stiffened. The doctor turned sharply. Who's here? Ellen's lips parted. A single tear slid down her cheek. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. Quick, uneven, desperate. And then a young man appeared in the doorway, eyes full of fear, chest heaving, a face that looked achingly familiar. Ellen, he gasped. Mom? The word mom hit the room like a lightning bolt. Sharp, impossible, world-splitting. Everyone froze. Even the machines seemed to pause for half a second, their frantic beeping hanging in the air like a suspended breath. Megan turned first, her body moving on instinct more than thought. When her eyes landed on the young man in the doorway, her heart lurched violently against her ribs. He looked barely in his 20s, maybe 24, 25 at most. Tall, trembling, face pale with terror. His eyes, God, his eyes were the same warm hazel as Ellen's. His mouth shaped like hers. Even the furrow in his brow was eerily familiar. And Megan knew in an instant so brutal it stole her breath. This was real. This was him. Daniel stared at the young man as though seeing a ghost. His lips parted silently, disbelief flooding his features. No, he whispered, voice cracking. Ethan? The young man's eyes darted from Daniel to Megan to the hospital bed. You found her? He choked. She knows about me? His voice broke as he stepped into the room, hands trembling. Oh, God. Ellen's eyelids fluttered at the sound of the voice she had never heard but had imagined for decades. Her pulse, which had been fading moments earlier, flickered like a weak flame fighting wind. Mom, the young man whispered again, his voice cracking open. Please, please don't go. Not before I get to know you. Megan's stomach twisted painfully. She had spent her whole life believing she was an only child. Now here stood a brother, her mother's first child, looking at Ellen with a desperation that tore the breath right out of her lungs. The doctor snapped out of the shock first. We need everyone to step back. She's unstable. But Ethan ignored him. He moved closer to the bed until he was standing beside Megan, his chest heaving, tears burning in his eyes. Please, he whispered to Ellen. I've been searching for you since I was 16. I've finally found you. Don't leave now. Those words pierced the room with unbearable weight. Megan turned slowly, staring at him with wide, trembling eyes. You were looking for her? Ethan wiped a shaking hand across his cheek. I always knew I was adopted. My parents told me early, but I never knew who she was, just that she was young and alone. He swallowed hard. They said she didn't have a choice. Daniel shut his eyes, pained. She didn't, he whispered. Ethan's gaze flicked to him. You're my... Daniel hesitated, then nodded. Your father. The young man's breath shuddered out of him, as if someone had punched the air from his lungs. He grabbed the edge of Ellen's bed for support. Megan pressed a trembling hand to her mouth, watching the two men, mirror images across generations, standing on either side of the woman who had spent her life protecting them both in silence. The doctor stepped forward, scanning Ellen's vitals. Her heart is responding. Slightly, he frowned. I don't know how, but her blood pressure just stabilized a little. The nurses exchanged startled glances. One whispered, she heard him. Ellen's fingers twitched. Ethan rushed closer. Mom, I'm here. I'm really here. Her lips moved. A faint broken whisper escaped. Let me see you. Ethan leaned down quickly so she could see his face. Ellen blinked slowly, taking him in. Tears welled in her eyes. She lifted a trembling hand, barely an inch off the bed. Ethan caught it with both of his, pressing her fingers to his cheek. "I'm sorry," Ellen breathed. Ethan shook his head fiercely. No, you don't apologize. Not to me." His voice cracked. "You didn't abandon me. You were forced. I know the truth now." Megan stood motionless, tears streaming, her heart pounding with grief, awe, and a strange, aching tenderness. She reached out slowly and touched Ethan's shoulder. He startled, then turned to her, their eyes locked, two strangers suddenly bound by blood, by broken history, by the woman fighting for her life between them. "I'm Megan," she whispered. A tear slid down Ethan's cheek. "I know." His mouth trembled into a sad, fragile smile. "I've watched you online, your graduation pictures, your LinkedIn. I didn't want to intrude until I found her." Megan burst into a quiet sob, covering her face. Ethan pulled her into a shaky hug, two siblings clinging to each other as if the floor might give out beneath their feet. Ellen watched them, really watched them, her eyes filling with something soft and luminous, like a long-awaited sunrise. For the first time in decades, her children were in the same room, together, touching, alive. A nurse whispered to the doctor, "Her vitals are rising again." The doctor stared at the monitor, stunned. "She's responding emotionally. It's keeping her conscious." The room swelled with a fragile, trembling hope. Ethan leaned close again, brushing Ellen's hair gently with his fingertips. "I'm here," he whispered. "And I?" His voice shook. "I forgive you. I love you." Ellen exhaled shakily, tears sliding from the corners of her eyes. "My boy." Her voice was paper-thin, but it carried a lifetime. Daniel stepped forward, voice cracking. "Ellen, we're all here now. Nothing is hidden anymore." For a moment the world felt suspended, as if this fragile thread of reconnection might be enough to pull Ellen back from the edge. But then the monitor beeped sharply. Once, twice, faster. The doctor's head snapped up. "Her heart rate spiking again." Daniel stepped back. Megan froze. Ethan's face collapsed in terror. "Move!" the doctor ordered. Nurses rushed in, pushing the siblings aside. Megan grabbed Ethan's hand for strength. Ethan squeezed back, trembling. Daniel stood behind them, rigid as stone, eyes glued to Ellen. The doctor leaned over Ellen. "Stay with us, Ellen. Stay with the people who love you." For a flicker of a second, her gaze lifted toward her two children standing together, her greatest secret now standing side by side. She opened her mouth to say something, to give a final truth, a final wish. But before the words came, the monitor let out a long, piercing alarm. "Flatline." The flatline sliced through the room like a scream made of pure electricity, a single continuous note, high, merciless, unbroken, the kind of sound that turns bones to ice. Megan's breath collapsed in her chest. "No, no, Mom, please." Ethan lurched forward as though his legs were no longer his own. Daniel's hand slammed against the wall, his face folding with a pain so raw it looked ancient. "Clear the area!" the doctor shouted. "Charging 200!" Nurses pulled Megan and Ethan back with urgent, trembling hands. The paddles pressed to Ellen's still chest. A jolt. Her body jerked violently, the line flickered, but did not return. "Again!" Another jolt. The monitor stuttered, then sank back to flat. Ethan broke with a sound no young man should ever have to make. He fell to his knees beside the bed, gripping the metal rail. "Mom, please don't leave yet. I just found you. I just got here. Please." Megan pressed both hands over her heart, as if trying to keep it from tearing apart. "I can't lose her. Not like this. Not before she speaks. Not before she knows we're here together." Daniel stood utterly still, expression hollow and shattered. He had spent years carrying guilt over a past he never got to understand. Now he was watching the woman who once loved him break on a hospital bed. Everything inside him trembled. The doctor took a breath. Charging! 300! He looked at Ellen's fragile body. He hesitated, just for a second. Then, we're not losing her today. Another shock. The room seemed to hold its breath. The monitor twitched, pulsed, then dipped. But suddenly, a faint blip. Then another. A rhythm. Weak, fragile, inconsistent, but there. Megan sobbed in relief, collapsing into Ethan's arms. Ethan held her tightly, shaking like a leaf. Daniel closed his eyes and whispered a thank you to whatever force was listening. A nurse checked Ellen's pupils. She's responding. Barely. But she's here. The doctor stepped back, exhaling. She's stabilized for the moment. But she's running out of time. If there's anything she needs to hear, now is when she might still hear it. Megan didn't hesitate. She grabbed her mother's hand gently, trembling. Mom, listen to me. We're here. I'm here. Ethan is here. You are not alone. And you never were. Ethan leaned in, voice cracking. We found each other because of you. Because you tried. You fought. You loved us enough to give us both life, even when it cost you everything. Daniel stepped forward and placed a hand on the foot of the bed. Ellen, you don't have to be afraid anymore. The truth is out. Your kids know each other. You can rest, knowing you didn't fail anyone. A tear slid down Ellen's cheek. Her fingers twitched weakly, almost like she was trying to squeeze Megan's hand. Megan leaned closer. I forgive you for everything you thought you did wrong. Her voice wavered. But Mom, I'm begging you. Please forgive me too. Ellen's eyelashes fluttered. Her lips parted. A whisper struggling through her chest like a small bird beating against a cage. I always forgave. The words were barely audible, but they landed like a soft, aching miracle. Megan collapsed into tears. Ethan covered his face with both hands, shoulders shaking. Daniel swallowed hard and looked away, his jaw quivering. For a moment, just a moment, it felt like Ellen might survive this by sheer force of love. But then, the monitor began to change again, not into a flat line this time, but into a pattern the doctor recognized instantly. Her heart wasn't crashing. It was slowing, dangerously. The doctor's expression tightened. She's fading. No, no, please, Megan cried, clutching Ellen's hand desperately. Mom, don't leave. Please don't leave us yet. We just found our family. Ethan leaned close. If you go, please know I love you. Please know I never blamed you. Please know I dreamed of this moment for years. Ellen's eyelids lifted, just a fraction. Her gaze drifted between them. Her lost children, now found. A soft peace blossomed in her expression. Her breathing steadied, shallow, slow, but calm. The doctor lowered his voice. She's holding on, somehow, but it won't last long. If there's anything she needs to say, or anything you need to hear, this is your moment. Megan pressed her forehead to her mother's. Mom, we're going to fix this family. I promise you. We'll make your pain mean something. We'll make your story matter. Ethan took her free hand. And I'll stay. I won't disappear. You won't lose me again. Daniel wiped a tear from his cheek. Your children will be okay, he whispered. I'll make sure of it. I owe you that much. Ellen's breath shuddered, a long, trembling inhale, as though her soul was trying to rise just enough to say something more. Her lips moved again, something like a final truth, a final request, a final secret. But before she could speak, the door burst open. A nurse rushed in, pale, breathless. Doctor, there's a problem. The doctor spun. What now? The nurse held out a clipboard with shaking hands. The insurance flagged her case. They're delaying authorization for the procedure. They won't approve emergency surgery unless a family member signs immediately. Megan's heart stopped. What? We're right here. Just give us the paper. The nurse's face tightened. There's an issue. Daniel stiffened. Ethan frowned. Megan stared terrified. What kind of issue? She whispered. The nurse swallowed hard. Her emergency contact is someone else. Someone none of you have mentioned. A cold silence fell over the room. Daniel's eyes narrowed. Who? The nurse hesitated. and then spoke the name. A name that made Megan's entire face drain of color. A name that made Daniel step back in shock. A name Ethan recognized instantly, because it was the one who adopted him, and the one person Ellen never wanted to see again. The nurse's voice wavered as she said the name, but the moment the syllables left her lips, something shifted in the air. A history that had been buried for decades suddenly felt present in the room, heavy, undeniable, and trembling with unfinished pain. "It's Margaret Hayes," the nurse whispered, "listed as her emergency contact." Megan's breath hitched. Daniel's shoulders tensed, like he'd taken a blow. Ethan's face went pale with recognition because she had been the woman who raised him, Ellen's mother, the woman who forced her into silence, the woman who took Ethan from her arms and lied to both of them, the woman Ellen had never forgiven but never truly escaped. For a long, stunned moment, no one spoke. The doctor stepped in gently. "We don't need her permission now that immediate family is here, but the system is flagging her as the primary point of contact. We just need one of you to sign so we can override it." Megan nodded shakily. "I'll sign. Whatever you need. Just give me the forms." The nurse rushed out to retrieve them, and the room settled again. Quiet, fragile, the air thick with the echoes of everything Ellen had endured. Megan turned to Ethan, voice trembling. She listed her mother, even after everything? Ethan swallowed. Maybe she never changed it. Maybe she thought she didn't matter enough to update it. His voice cracked. Maybe she still wanted some piece of her mother to be there if she ever fell. Daniel let out a quiet, aching exhale. "Some wounds never teach you to protect yourself," he said softly. "They only teach you how to survive." The nurse returned with the clipboard. Megan signed, hand shaking, and handed it back. "Help her," she whispered. "Do everything you can." The nurse nodded and hurried away. Now there was nothing left but silence, the kind that wraps around a room like a soft blanket, even when the heart inside it is breaking. Ethan stepped to Ellen's side, pulling a chair close. He took her hand gently, reverently, as if he feared she might crumble beneath his touch. "I don't blame you," he whispered. "I never did. I just wanted to know you." A tear slid from Ellen's closed eye, a fragile glimmer of a lifetime of longing. Megan moved beside her, taking her other hand. "I'm so sorry for the years I didn't see you," she whispered. "I'm so sorry for all the times you needed me and I wasn't there." Her voice cracked. "I love you. I love you more than I ever said." "Beep." Daniel lowered himself at the foot of the bed, hands clasped, head bowed. "You saved me," he murmured. "When everyone else walked away, you didn't. I'll never forget it." Ellen's breathing was soft now, slow, rhythmic, each inhale thinner than the one before. The doctor stepped back in quietly and looked over the monitors. "She's very weak. The procedure won't help her now," he said gently. "She's fading naturally, peacefully." Megan felt another sob rising but forced herself to stay steady, to be strong in the way she wished she had been earlier that day. "Mom, we're with you," she whispered. "All of us." Ethan bowed his head until it rested against their intertwined hands. "I found you," he whispered, "and I will love you for the rest of my life." Daniel blinked hard, tears gathering. "You gave us both life, even when no one gave you a choice." The beeping of the monitor slowed, softened, spread out like footsteps walking into a distance no one else could follow. Ellen's lips parted one last time. Her voice was barely audible, just a breath, but all three heard it clearly. "Thank you for finding each other." Then her chest rose, fell, and settled. The monitor gave a soft, steady tone. Not a scream this time, not a shock, just a gentle declaration of stillness. Megan cried quietly, her body folding over her mother's hand. Ethan slid an arm around her, holding her tightly. Daniel closed his eyes, letting the weight of grief and gratitude wash over him in equal measure. For a while, no one moved. Grief took its time. Love filled the silence, and 3 lives transformed in the presence of a woman who had been stronger than anyone ever realized. Eventually, the doctor stepped forward and placed his hand gently on Megan's shoulder. She wasn't alone. he said softly. She left knowing she mattered, and knowing her truth finally reached the people it was meant for. Megan nodded through tears. "We'll take care of each other," she whispered. "We'll honor her." Ethan squeezed her hand. Daniel placed a hand on both their shoulders, a quiet promise in his touch. They stood together, three broken pieces forming a new shape, bound by love, loss, and the truth Ellen had protected all her life. Outside, dawn began to break. Soft gold filtered through the hospital windows, wrapping the room in a warm, gentle light. A light that felt like forgiveness. A light that felt like peace. Ellen Hayes had spent her life afraid of being a burden, but in the end, she became something far greater. A bridge that reunited her family, a mother in life, a healer in death, and her story, her truth, would live on in the hearts of the children she never stopped loving.